Welcome to Travel in Style, a podcast created to inspire travel, have fun, and give a unique perspective on how to do all of the above through the eyes and lens of travel expert and award-winning photographer and publisher Jill Pater. Jill has worked in over 100 countries on assignment and has published 15 books on architecture, design, travel, and gastronomy. Today's show is brought to you by Calpac, a lifestyle luggage and travel accessory brand. To find out more on Calpac, you can visit calpactravel.com, and to find out more on Jill, you can visit jillpater.com. Hello, and welcome back to Travel in Style. I'm your host, Kevin, along with Sam.
Hello.
How you doing, Sam?
I'm doing great.
Hanging in there?
Yeah, how are you?
Ready to do a little traveling?
I am so ready.
Awesome. Travel in Style is sponsored by Calpac. We are here today with our travel expert, Jill Pater. Hello, Jill. How are you?
I'm doing well, thanks.
Awesome. So if I have it correct here, you're going to be taking us to London today.
I am.
Foggy London town.
I knew you were going to do that. I was waiting.
I had to do it. Foggy London town.
Probably my favorite city in the world. I'm
No
very
kidding.
excited. Yes.
I feel like you've been to a ton of cities.
I
This
have.
is your favorite.
This is one of my favorites. Yeah.
One of
my
preface it a little
favorites.
bit.
You know?
Yeah.
Okay, good.
Awesome.
London and Cape Town, I would say.
Okay, let's
Yeah.
let's dive into it. Why is it one of your favorite cities?
I think because it's so diverse, you never get bored in London. I lived there for 5 years, and every day I would walk down the same street to go to school or get transportation to where I was working. And every day you notice a new shop or a new art gallery or museum or something opening up. I mean, it's such a dynamic city. There's so much to do, and it has such a diverse population living there.
When you mention like there's always a new place, new shop opening up, does that mean that it's like gentrified, or you mean it's just like little boutiques here and there?
Yeah,
I'm trying to imagine.
Yeah, I mean, it is a very gentrified city by all means, but just new things kind of changing and happening. Certainly, like their culinary scene has grown leaps and bounds over the last decade. And so always like great new restaurants to try, and just the cross section of people. London is kind of the center of the world. It's like the hub for European travel. And it brings, I feel like, the best of all worlds.
That's wonderful.
Do you find that, I mean, is it easier at all to be in London because, everyone speaks English and it's kind of like, the States?
Definitely, like as compared to, say, Paris, which is also a great city, similar weather. Yeah, definitely easier because it is English speaking, and London's just bigger. You kind of have more going on there, so I think it gets more tourism, I would say, than Paris does. You just have a bigger cross section of people.
So you lived there for 5 years, correct? Was that for work, for personal, for fun?
Yes, I went to graduate school there and then worked and stayed on for a few years before moving back to the States. And I still go back every once in a while. I teach, I guest lecture there and teach workshops in photography.
So I guess is London one of your favorite cities just because you're so familiar with it, or is it great for work, for shooting, for architecture, for culinary?
I would say it has always been, I think, from my first time ever visiting London. I think for me, it's such an appeal to the senses. It has some of the best art galleries in the world. It has great theater, an amazing music scene. And it's just, I love walking the city, going to new restaurants. I have lots of friends that live there. So it's just, for me, it's hard to even separate it anymore. And I also do love teaching my guest lecture and teach there too.
I mean, before you went to graduate school there, had you visited London before?
I had.
Okay.
I'd interned there in college, and then,
And then
was
you're like,
dying
I'm
to get
going back
Yes.
for a reason.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's really wonderful. You became a local basically within the 5 years, and then you go back and you discover something new every time you go.
Yes. And every time it changes so much. So, your local knowledge is good for like the main things, but it's almost a new city every time.
Yeah. Do you go to different cities? Like, do you find, is it difficult to get around London? I feel like people talk about the transportation there. There's trains and, is it a challenge at all getting around the city?
UK has like some of the best public transportation in the world, particularly London. Like the tube, their metro is so comprehensive. It gets you to every part of the city. They have a great bus system that's basically 24 hours a day. It's very easy.
When I think of London, I think of buses for sure.
Yeah. The double-decker buses.
Yes,
Yeah. Taxis, Ubers. You have every possible form.
It sounds like LA needs to take a note from
on public transportation
from
for
London.
sure,
Oh my
for
gosh.
sure. And then it's easy to take trains, and not only trains throughout the country, but also it's a huge hub for like cheap air flights throughout Europe.
Throughout the year, would you say? Or what's the best time of the year to go?
Really, anytime, London doesn't get crazy cold. I
Okay.
mean, there's usually like 1 or 2 weeks out of the year where, like for most people, it's not super comfortable, but it never gets like Midwestern cold. I'm from Wisconsin,
Right.
so it never gets that cold. But I would say, tourist season, I would avoid like, summer and spring, summer and fall, I think are probably the best times. But even like November, like a pre-holiday shopping trip there, I love that time of year there. I would say there's really not a bad time of year.
Right. I think that's a good point, though. So, London can be known as being relatively kind of expensive. Is there a way to navigate the city and to travel there, on a budget, or if you don't have, $1 million salary?
Yes.
$1 million.
Right.
Absolutely. And that's a common concern with London. And it definitely is. It definitely can be a very expensive city. But the great thing about it is, one, the public transportation is so comprehensive that you don't need to take taxis or Ubers to most places. Also, the international airfare there is usually, it's first of all, a lot of direct flights from most major U.S. cities, and they're very reasonable throughout the year. I'd say the biggest challenge in London is going to be your hotel, like finding a hotel or bed and breakfast
That
or
was gonna be my
Airbnb
next
that you
question.
want to stay at. And I think, again, if you're not traveling in like the height of height season, you can find great things. And with public transportation being so accessible, you can stay with not right in the stack of the center and still get there relatively reasonably. But I would say the hotel is like just the biggest challenge, finding a place that you like within the budget. But there are lots of kind of bed and breakfast there, a lot of cute places, and you're not really going to be in your hotel that often. You're going to be out and about the whole
yeah.
time.
I feel like you need to publish a book on just how to travel on a budget.
Yes.
Just
Yeah.
because all these
Especially
great kinda
in
hacks.
London,
Yeah.
because I do imagine that it is relatively expensive too, like Europe in general. But for London, I'm trying to figure out, are you strategic about your, menu for the day, transportation, just like things that you do on a day-by-day basis? Plus, you were a student for some time there. How did you budget?
Well, I have to say, as a student versus now, it's a very different city. When you go back with a little bit more money, it's much
Right.
more
Hostels
enjoyable.
and yeah.
Like most things in life, it's better with money. But there are the thing is there are a lot of free museums. There's tons of free things to do in London and museums with complimentary entrance. And you could never do everything there is to do, even all the main tourist sites. So I think just, coming together with a list of all the things that you want to do and figuring out budget that way is a good way to go. In terms of food options, there are great, London is known for its curry, its Indian food. And so there are great kind of fish and chip options, like those cheaper meals, as well as obviously going back to Michelin star restaurants. So you have there is a range there. And, it's always hard in the city because you're attracted to different things. I think the other thing there are the arts. They have amazing, opera, ballet, theater.
Yes.
That's well known for. So the challenge isn't that any of these individual things are so expensive. It's that when you pack them into one day, it kind of adds up because you want to do and see everything. But it can be very budget friendly if you plan around it. If you get the hotel, you get a good deal on the flight, and then public transportation will get you around to most places. It's usually just the extras that end up being
Cost.
But you got to have some extras.
Yeah, of
You
course.
need the little sprinkle in the extras.
Yes.
So for somebody visiting for their very first time, what are the top 3 things they have to do?
That's a tough one because I think it really depends on your interests. Like for me, art is, number one. I
Right.
love the Tate Modern. I love the National Galleries there are amazing. Buckingham Palace, if it's open while you're there,
Oh, yeah.
is a big one. But it kind of depends on your different tastes. If you're into the music scene, there's like thousands of options
Oh, my
for
gosh,
that.
yeah.
If you like to shop and go to boutiques, you have that as an option. It has beautiful parks. It's just hard. The London Eye, some people like the more touristy things like London Eye. Tour of Parliament, if you can get one, is amazing. The stunning architecture, the history. You just have so much there that you do. That is one recommendation I have when traveling there. Is like you do kind of have to pick and choose things because you will burn out. And I've had friends come and visit, and you will burn out if you try to do it all. You kind of
Jam-pack
have to
everything.
pick. Yeah,
You just have
pick
to
your-
go there for grad school and then teach
You
there.
have to stay
and
there.
he's-
But it's funny because even living there, you can't you can't do it all. Like
Yeah.
I would go to different events and museums and gallery openings and shows and things, and you can never do it all. And that's what makes it such a tantalizing city to be in,
Yeah.
and always so fun to go back.
I think the real question is, since you lived there for an extended period of time, is it soccer or football?
Football. Yeah.
Americans
We're
got
the
it
only
wrong.
we're the only ones that
Right?
call it soccer.
I was literally waiting for you for this like question, like, oh,
That was
what's
it.
going to be the question?
Yeah.
It made me forget my question.
Sorry.
So football is the thing.
Football is the way to go.
Well, you were saying that, it reminded me how like you could be a native or a local in your own city and still be a tourist in it, and so you're constantly learning new things. Like being in Los Angeles, there's so many places that you don't go to all the time. Like I have a friend who's always lived here and has never been to the Getty Villa. So how are you on discovering new things within London? Whether it was during the span of the 5 years or when you come back, like what brings you to new adventures when you visit?
I think I always have an eye on what's going on, and reading like latest openings and watching the shows, and I know what a treat it is to be there. So when I go back, I know I'm there for a limited amount of time and make the most of it. And I usually, the last couple of times, I rent a flat from a friend who lives next to the Barbican Center, which is a performing arts center. So I would literally just go there, and there wasn't a TV in the flat or Wi-Fi, so I
Yeah.
literally just go there, and I go to that center every night, and they have what they call return tickets, which are people that don't show
Oh,
up to
yeah.
the show, and
So
so you
they're
get
cheaper.
like discount tickets,
Okay.
right? And so that would just be my entertainment. Would be like theater, grand theater performance or music or whatever was going on. So I think the best you can do is make the most of the time that you have. I loved going to the Royal Ballet when I'm there, checking out new restaurants, and I have friends that live there, and we kind of strategize and figure out what
Yeah.
we're gonna do.
You
And-
call them up and you're like, I'm coming to
I'm
London.
I'm coming to London. Yeah. No, they know me well. They all tease me because every weekend I'm there. We're just so used to, like, in the U.S., our distances are so great, and there everything is so close. So like,
Much
Yeah.
easier
I
to
called
get
my
around.
friend, and I'm like, we're going to Cyprus for the weekend, and all these flights are like dirt cheap. Go to Provence for the weekend. We're going here for the weekend, and
From
and-
there.
yeah, and to people who live there, that's crazy. They would
Yeah.
never spend that lots of time, but I'm like, we have to do it just because we can.
Because
So
you
we're going.
can.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So with all the places that you do travel to,
Mhm.
right? Is London one of the places that, I mean, I know you said it's one of your favorite cities, right? But do you recommend it? Is it one that you travel back to or would travel back to frequently for work, for always just pleasure? It sounds like a great and very enjoyable city, but when you go, is there usually more of a reason for work purposes?
There usually is. There's usually a work impetus. It's usually around teaching or consulting at the University of the Arts in London. I consult on the photography program there. So that's usually the impetus. But then, other times I'll be in Europe. I'll fly through there to visit friends and say
She
hello.
just stops by.
I was going to say, it
Yeah.
sounds like everywhere you travel to, like, it just happens to be a really awesome city.
Happens,
Like,
yeah, just happens.
How
Happy
coincidental.
happenstance. But I highly recommend London. I think in the scheme of things, London gets underrated to say Paris or parts of Italy. But I think it's just an amazing city that people really love. It's easy for travelers, obviously from the U.S. because it's English speaking, and there's just so many different things to do that it appeals to people with all different kinds of varied interests.
When you travel to all these different cities, and especially one that is as significant as London, do you pull a lot of inspiration from these cities, for future work or just for your daily life?
Absolutely, and particularly with London, I mean the art scene there is off the charts. So going to different gallery shows and even teaching there because the student body there is so international. So you meet different people. There's so many different creative influences, and it's just such a hub of, I would say, international humanity, that it's very influential, I would say. And it's just a different, anytime you get out of particularly cities like LA, you get such a different perspective on things, which I
Right.
think is always important too.
That really makes me really excited because I felt the same way as far as I studied abroad, but we were in the Netherlands, and it totally made me look at design and art in a totally different way other than seeing it in textbooks or online. So I could imagine that you're constantly soaking up something super new, and then you come back to Los Angeles and it's just like this back and forth of inspiration being thrown in and then pulled out. So how is it when you guest lecture for your students? Do you think that they feel like you bring an LA, US vibe when you teach, or are you sticking to like a certain curriculum?
I'm sure I do, because a lot of my teaching there is based on, me being a working photographer. So they want input from somebody who's working and doing their job and,
Traveling
giving
around the
them
world
tips.
too,
Yeah.
right?
And how you kind of how you manage this creative life, right? Of doing all these different things and yet still making money and
Yeah.
having a successful business. So I think there's definitely a very American element to that, because we live in a very entrepreneurial culture where there's just a level of possibility here that I don't think translates as much in Europe. It's less entrepreneurial in that way. And so I think it's tougher actually for artists there, and for some extent being on their own and being freelance. So I'm sure that American side comes through, but I think I have, one of the nice things about traveling and working all over the world is you do gain a global perspective on things, and that brings into it too, and how to be a global citizen, how to work and live kind of globally and take the best of all worlds and, use those elements to refine you and what you do.
Yeah.
After an extended stay in London, have you ever come back to the States with an accent like Madonna?
Just like on accident.
Hello.
After the 5 years I spent there, you do start to change. When I first went there for graduate school, I felt like such an American, because our sentence structure is different. Words that we say like awesome, are not used. And so you do start to form your sentences a little differently so people understand you. So I did have a little bit of that twang, but it went away, within a month after the first time. But now on my trips now, no, I don't do that.
Is there anything that still surprises you about London? Because you have been there so frequently, but is there anything that either maybe you look forward to always going back to, or surprises you?
I think how different it is. I mean, the one thing about London is because it's constantly changing, it always feels like home, but it's never quite home. And so that the juxtaposition of those two things, I think going back always kind of surprises me, how different it is, how it just doesn't, it refuses to stay kind of the same. And it has become, when I first went back to teach, I hadn't been there for 10 years. So there was a span of time that I hadn't been there. And so the biggest shock then was the change in the culinary scene, because when I was there as a student, it still was, London had, notorious kind of British food was not well rated certainly among its European counterparts. And now London is probably one of the top food cities, if not the top food city in Europe. And so that has expanded their gastropub scene, gourmet British food, which, were not words that you would use like 12 years ago. So that, I think, has been a very positive change. But also the city itself has become more international. People now say it's hard to find a Brit in London, hard to find an English person in London.
Right.
So those are, I would say, the biggest changes.
That's so exciting. I just wanted to go back real quick to something about students. What kind of advice, if you had a piece of advice to any young person that is looking to do what you do, like, photograph but travel around the world, like on a freelance basis? Like, what's the leap of faith they have to take?
I think it's a big one with, as with anything. I think it's just finding your passion and finding what works for you, and just starting, putting one foot in front of the other and starting to do it to the extent that you can, and finding ways. I think the biggest thing usually for students revolves around budget, but in life you either tend to have time or money, but rarely both at the same time. Mm-hmm. So taking advantage of, if in the case of a student, if you have time to do it, and even, I know students that crowdfund their trips and crowdfund, even if it's just your parents.
Smart.
Even if it's
crowdfund a home?
Yeah.
Right, real quick.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Especially in London, though.
Right.
Yeah.
Definitely crowdfunding for a home there. But yeah, for students, it's understanding that, like, in the long-term scheme, if that's what you want to do, then that one will take some investment. And if you have time, that's half of the equation. So looking for ways to budget and make it happen. And certainly I think, taking a year off to travel, or, even if it's a couple months off to do, the full European tour, it's definitely worth its weight in gold. I think it's a very formative experience. And it's a form of education. Travel isn't just for fun. It's, you think of how much you pay to go to university, especially now and live. Travel, you learn just as much, and it's frankly less expensive than college. So.
Right. Exactly.
So that's a justification you should use for your parents or anyone else funding your trip.
Right. You should add it into your budget.
Yes.
Well,
Yes, Sam, do you know what time it is?
I think so.
You know what time it
It's
is?
time for Jill's packing hacks. And in this case, she's going to talk to us about the art of layering.
Yes.
So,
So layering in travel is very important, and this will help you save a lot of room, especially if you're traveling carry-on only, but in your luggage. So typically on the planes can be unusually cold, and so I always recommend working in layers, and that way you can kind of swap out your bottom layers every day, of course, and then your top layers, they're not going to get dirty or need to be laundered as frequently. And certainly for the plane, like I like lots of layers. I'm always freezing on planes, so I usually bring like a wool wrap and then a jacket over that. And sometimes just having those nice outerwear pieces helps you feel dressy as a traveler, even though you might be kind of wearing the same thing every day. You don't feel dirty doing it because you have things underneath. But I think it's a big part. And as you're wearing those layers, that means you don't have to pack them in your bag.
Right.
And so I think it just makes for an easier system of swapping things out.
Awesome
Smart.
stuff. Yeah.
Yes.
Jill, thank you once again.
Thank you.
And again, if you enjoyed this podcast, please be sure to subscribe, rate, and review.
Yep. We will come back in 2 weeks on Travel and Style.
Great. Thank you.
You can learn more about Jill Pater on jillpater.com, and to read more about each destination, please visit Calpac's blog, destinationcalpac.com, for Jill's tips and amazing photography. Find more about our podcast, Travel and Style, on iTunes, YouTube, and SoundCloud. If you enjoyed this show, please subscribe, rate, and send us a nice review. Happy travels!